It does seem like that the folks are overplaying this trial. We had a good trial in Florida. It was an honest, fair trial. The jury decided, but man, they're beating up Hispanics and saying this is in payment for Trayvon Martin. It's kind of sad. I hope it stops. Well, despite all the protests in the streets, it appears race was not an issue in the jury's decision to find George Zimmerman not guilty for the murder of Trayvon Martin.
One of the jurors is speaking out. She says she voted to acquit Zimmerman because she believed he feared for his life. Gary Lane has the story.
Angry protesters ran through the streets of Los Angeles for a second night, interrupting traffic, breaking windows, and even looting a Walmart store. Police struggled to contain the unrest to the Crenshaw district, the heart of LA's black community. Meanwhile, one of the 6 jurors in the Zimmerman trial, known only as juror number 37B, told CNN she voted to acquit George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin because she had no doubt Zimmerman feared for his life. She said both Martin and Zimmerman could have walked away from their tragic encounter. She said, "I think all of us thought race did not play a role. We never had that discussion." Juror 37B said 3 jurors favored convicting Zimmerman, but changed their minds after repeated scrutiny of the evidence presented at the trial. Zimmerman's whereabouts are not known, but his parents are concerned for his safety.
It's a lot of death threats on, in the social media.
We've had an enormous amount of death threats.
And even though Zimmerman was found not guilty of criminal charges, his ordeal may not end anytime soon. Civil rights leaders are pushing for federal charges.
Clearly, there are grounds for civil rights charges here. We always said there would be a plan B, but there needed to be a plan A. There would never have been protests if there had been an arrest.
The U.S. Department of Justice is still considering a civil rights case against Zimmerman.
I share your concern. And as we first acknowledged last spring, we have opened an investigation into this matter.
And Martin's parents are considering a possible wrongful death lawsuit against Zimmerman as well. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. You know, folks, there was a tragedy in Mississippi. A man named Emmett Till was taken and lynched and brutally murdered. And it was apparently supported by the state, people involved in the government, at least the local government. And there was no question of what that was. This thing was not Emmett Till. This was a young man who apparently jumped on a man who thought he was a quasi-policeman. And the two had a scuffle, and one of them shot the other one. Well, that's the way it was. So why do we make such a big thing of it? I mean, the facts went to the jury. The jury deliberated and had all the evidence. And they said, we cannot find intentional murder. We can't find second-degree murder, nor can we find manslaughter. That's it. This wasn't a state action. The state wasn't involved. It wasn't a civil rights matter. It was a matter between 2 guys. They had a fight. So why don't we just chill out and say justice has been served, justice has been done, and let's not try to take vengeance. In one case, a Hispanic was jumped upon by a gang of black young people saying, we're going to pay you back for Trayvon. Well, he didn't have anything to do with Trayvon. He was in New York. But nevertheless, that kind of thing, we don't need to exacerbate the racial tension. What we need to do is to love each other and live in harmony in this land and respect the rule of law. Whether that's going to be done remains to be seen. You know, it's a hot summer and not a whole lot in the news, and so people got to do something. And when the heat comes, the temperatures flare. Well, the government has scored a victory in the battle against child pornography. Wendy Griffith has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Wendy.
Pat, major arrest this week in an international child porn sting operation. Authorities say they arrested 255 suspected child predators in 9 nations, including here in the U.S. 61 child victims were also identified. The month-long sting was known as iGuardian. Agents say predators are turning more and more to the internet for their crimes, and they're seeing a growing trend called sextortion, where children are blackmailed into providing pornographic images of themselves.
The internet is too big, the numbers of abusers too large, elusive, and scattered throughout the world. Deceit, impersonation, and blackmail are the tricks of this terrible trade.
So far this year, more than 1,600 arrests have been made in similar investigations. Well, as you mentioned, Pat, a blistering heat wave is scorching parts of the country today, from Michigan to the East Coast. Temperatures are soaring into the 90s, but the heat and humidity will make it feel even hotter. Last year, at least 155 people died from heat-related illness. Cities are taking action to protect their citizens, though. Advisories and warnings are in place in Boston, New York City, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. And several cities in the Northeast opened cooling centers to help residents beat the heat. In Portland, Maine, 5 people were taken to a hospital after being overcome by the heat during a half marathon. Those who have to be outside are encouraged to take frequent breaks and drink lots of water.
You ever been close to death? This is about 2 steps closer. Literally, like, there's nothing you can do to keep cool.
Walking around in this heat, you have to kind of overhydrate. You have to drink even if you're not thirsty.
It is hot. Forecasters say the heat wave will continue for several days, expanding into the Midwest and northern plains by midweek. Edward Snowden, the man who leaked the information on the government's electronic surveillance programs, apparently has more secrets, including the blueprint for how our country's national security agency operates. And if the information is made public, it could harm the United States. George Thomas has that story.
If you thought Edward Snowden's revelations of the NSA's massive snooping operation was all he had, think again.
In order to take documents that proved that what he was saying was true, he had to take ones that included very sensitive, detailed blueprints.
Glenn Greenwald is the columnist with a British newspaper who first reported on the intelligence leaks. He says Snowden has what he calls the instruction manual for how the NSA is built.
He's in possession of literally thousands of documents that contain very specific blueprints that would allow somebody who read them to know exactly how the NSA does what it does.
And perhaps more alarming is just how easy it was for Snowden to apparently get his hands on the treasure trove of data.
Being able to inform people about the true severity of how much each NSA analyst has access to people's personal private communications with very little oversight, checks, or safeguards.
Snowden emerged for the first time in weeks last Friday, still in hiding in a Moscow airport. He wants Russian asylum until he can legally travel on to Latin America. Russia says they'll grant his request, but on condition he stops the leaks. Greenwald says the NSA agent has scores of documents on other surveillance programs that, if released publicly, would be very harmful to the United States.
There are other domestic spying programs that have yet to be revealed, similar in nature to the ones we have revealed.
The White House wants Russia to send him back to face felony charges.
He's very resigned to the fact that things might go terribly wrong, and he absolutely is at peace with that.
And Greenwald has this warning to anyone trying to harm Snowden.
It's not simply a matter of if he dies, things get released. It's more nuanced than that. It's really a way to just protect himself against extremely rogue behavior on the part of the United States, by which I mean violent actions towards him designed to end his life.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Snowden is still in Russia, and Russian President Vladimir Putin says he hopes he leaves as soon as possible. Well, same-sex marriage is going ahead in California. The state can keep issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples because the state Supreme Court has refused a request to stop it. Supporters of traditional marriage had filed a lawsuit asking the state to keep enforcing the ban on gay marriage while their legal battle continued. Democrats are threatening to change the rules of the Senate to stop Republicans from using filibusters to block the president's nominees for top executive jobs. Both sides say they're still talking and trying to avoid a showdown, but Republicans warn if Democrats do make the change, it could basically shut down the Senate. Do you think that'll happen, Pat?
Well, it probably will. You know what, if you recall back, there were some outstanding nominees to especially the D.C. circuit, that were put up before the Senate, And the Democrats would not allow them. They were filibustering, and they said they got in the 60 rule. Actually, the Constitution, all you need is a majority of votes. There was none of this 60 vote thing, but then it takes 60 votes to bring cloture to keep the debate from going on. So people would just say, well, I'm going to filibuster, and bing, that would shut the Senate down. But the Democrats were the ones who were doing it. And now the tables have turned. They have the majority. But the president has put forward some really squirrely nominees for various positions. A couple in the National Labor Relations Board were put on illegally. The courts have ruled they don't have a legal quorum, and yet they've gone ahead to issue all kinds of regulations. And these nominees, plus some others that he has proposed, that people say we don't like. I think for Senator Reid to act aggrieved, because he has completely changed sides. He flipped the way he was talking before, when he wanted to keep the filibuster when they were in the minority, and now that they're the majority, suddenly he decides that the good of the American people demand that the filibuster be over. But it does seem to me that the Senate has gotten dysfunctional. They are really bad, and from what indication I've seen, the partisanship has risen to close to 70 to 80%. It no longer is people, the Senate consists of people who are trying to do good for the country. They're individuals trying to do good not only for their party, but for specific ideological constituencies. And the Senate is broken, and that casts aspersions on the entire United States Congress. Wendy?
Pat, President Obama says the nation is kinder and gentler thanks to former President George H.W. Bush. Bush, sporting his now signature bold socks, joined Mr. Obama in the White House Monday to honor the 5,000th winner of the Daily Point of Light Award, an honor created by former president nearly 20 years ago to honor volunteerism.
Mr. President, I'm one of millions of people who've been inspired by your passion and your commitment. You have helped so many Americans discover that they too have something to contribute, that they too have the power to make a difference.
Floyd Hammer and Kathy Hamilton, a retired couple from Iowa, were honored for delivering meals to hungry children in more than 15 countries. Well, the later you work in life, the better it is for your brain. New research says the longer you work, the less likely you are to develop Alzheimer's disease. The huge study included 500,000 people, and it showed for each additional year that a person worked, the risk of getting Alzheimer's was reduced by 3%. The reason is because working is more demanding than retirement, physically, mentally, and socially. Stimulation in all three of those areas apparently leads to a healthy brain. So, Pat, way to go. Keep working.
I'm in to 100. There's no question about it. I tell you, this Alzheimer's is something that is just horrible. It is like a living death. It's living hell. And it's so hard on the loved ones. It costs billions of dollars, and we've just got to get a cure for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there certainly is a lot of research being done. Hopefully we'll see that soon.
But Terry's not enough. They aren't spending enough on Alzheimer's. They're spending money on a lot of things, but they're not really focusing like they should on this. And I think it's such a deadly thing. And it just breaks people's hearts to see a husband with a wife who's Alzheimer's, or a wife or the husband, and they die pretty quickly after they're put into some kind of a nursing care facility. But nevertheless, it's terrible. It's
difficult for everybody involved.
A living hell, a living hell. Well, anyhow, sooner or later we'll find a cure for it, but we haven't got it yet.
The Federal Communications Commission has delayed its decision on whether or not to allow more nudity and cursing on broadcast TV. The Hill newspaper reports that regulators are extending the amount of time that the public can comment on the proposal. The FCC has already received more than 100,000 comments, and the overwhelming majority of them are opposed to it. The comment deadline is now extended to August 2nd. Great Britain is now one step closer to legalizing gay marriage. The measure has passed the House of Lords and now goes back to the House of Commons, where it's expected to win final approval. Not everyone's on board, though. Christians have gathered to pray and show their support for traditional marriage, and many conservative lawmakers are breaking ranks with Prime Minister David Cameron, who supports the measure. If the bill passes, the Church of England will not be affected. The legislation bars the church from performing gay marriages. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.